Over the last few weeks, I have found myself in a very deeply reflective and prayerful place. And I guess you could really describe my personality that way just about all the time. I'm pretty serious and contemplative, but as I process the possibilities that stand in front of our church right now and the incredible vision initiative that we're going to be talking about in the next few weeks, I've been a little more prayerful and introspective and contemplative than normal. And as most of you know, every time we approach the end of one year and beginning of another year, I always seek the face of God about a direction or a theme or a focus. And it's usually a word that we focus on the next year, or it's a phrase that we focus on the next year that will guide our teaching, our sermons, our prayer times. And as I've been reflecting lately, I've been thinking back on some of those words and phrases from past years. In 2016, as we came to the end of 2016, I sensed the Lord saying that 2017 was going to be a year of wonder. And I jumped to conclusions because I assumed that wonder meant awe and amazement, that 2017 was going to be a year where the people of this church literally stood back and marveled and wondered at the power of God. But out of ignorance or maybe naivety, I hadn't really considered the fullness of what God was trying to say. I only focused on one meaning of the word wonder. You see, wonder has two almost conflicting definitions. One definition says wonder is awe and amazement. We stand back and wonder with awe and amazement at the majesty of God. Or another definition is almost the exact opposite. To wonder is to curiously speculate. It's questioning. I wonder why God would allow this to happen. As 2017 unfolded, I quickly learned that God had been trying to warn me, to brace me during that prayer time when He whispered that 2017 was going to be a year of wonder. He was trying to brace me for my own questioning and questioning from other people. In January 2017, a beautiful and spiritually vibrant teenage girl in our church, Allie Hooten, was tragically killed in an accident. Throughout the course of that year, I buried two older men, Oscar Rowland and Bill Wood, both who had been an incredible support to me as a young pastor from the moment I arrived. They were pastors' friends, and the minute that I was living life without them, I felt vulnerable. During that year, Irene Dufresne, Pastor Taylor's wife, Brennan and Haley and Caroline's mom, was promoted to heaven right after her 40th birthday after an intense battle with cancer. During the Christmas season of 2017, one of my closest friends and a beloved staff pastor here at North Place Church was relieved of his duties because of a moral indiscretion. I'm obviously not mentioning every heartache and all the pain. Just a few tragedies and losses to give some of you who have joined the journey since that time, you didn't live through it, just to give you some sense of what this body walked through in such a short period of time. From the beginning of 2017 to the very last hours of 2017, it felt like our hearts were being ripped out of our chest and trampled on. I remember vividly on Christmas Eve 2017, sitting with my face buried in my hands, sobbing and asking God, when will it ever stop? And the reality is, it won't stop. We live in a fallen world among frail people. And living in a sinful world, it means heartache and pain and tragedy comes to the just and the unjust. And until we see Jesus face to face, our joy in this world is always going to be mingled with sorrow. It's never going to stop. That year and the months that followed were some of the most personally and professionally painful months of my life. It was a year of wonder, all right, but it was a lot more of wondering why than standing back in wonder, in awe and amazement. As a church family, we become very familiar with heartache and heartbreak and the wondering why. But as we look back, I can, and I think most of us can see the undeniable fingerprints of God that helped us navigate every moment of those difficult hours. As I stand here today, 2.5 years later, I really do look back in awe at the goodness and grace of God that sustained us during that time and continues to sustain us today. For some of you, this is your 2017. No, it's not 2017, it's 2019, but it is the toughest season of your life. And I've learned as a pastor That while there are people that I'm pastoring that are going through some of the best seasons of their life, concurrently, there are other people that I'm pastoring at the same time who are going through the worst seasons of their life. And individually, we are all navigating our own independent seasons. But when I think collectively and corporately, deep within my heart, as a church family, I believe our seasons of loss and adversity have prepared us even more to stand back in wonder and awe at the majesty of God that we're about to walk into. We've become very familiar with wondering why and asking the questions. And I really believe that the Lord wants to take us to the other side of wonder, where we can literally marvel at the majesty of God. On the heels of all that happened in 2017, I preached a message the first weekend of 2018, that first Sunday, Saturday and Sunday of 2018. It was called Passageways. And during that season of grief and loss, both personally and professionally, a friend handed to me a message that Charlotte Gamble had preached at a women's conference. And I know it was from a woman to women, but it helped this man greatly. It became an inspiration to me, and it inspired some of the things I shared with you on that first weekend in 2018. And I said a moment ago, I've been in a season of deep reflection, looking back on the work of God among us in the past to prepare our hearts for what God is about to do in our future. So this last week, I went back to that message. And as I read over it, I wept. I wept at reliving some of the emotions. I was thinking, what did I even say on the heels of that heartbreak and devastation? I don't even remember. What did I say? And I went back and I read the manuscript, and I literally wept as I read it. I relived some of the emotions, but some of the tears were not grief tears. Some of the tears were gratitude tears, seeing God at work in that body, in our church, from that moment up until this particular place. Yes, we're in a different season now. We're in a different place now. But I think the conversation I had the first weekend of January 2018 has as much to say to prepare us for the wonder and awe of God that we're going to experience in the days ahead, as it did during the why season when we were questioning and in the middle of our pain. Maybe more to say to us now than it did then. There's a strong personal application to what I'm going to say. There is a strong corporate application to what I'm going to say. So I want you to look at this with two sets of lenses. How does this impact you and your family? And how does this impact our church? I want us to look at that Old Testament story of an unnamed woman in 2 Kings chapter 4. Now, all of us know her as a woman from the city of Shunem. Matter of fact, if you grew up in church, you grew up hearing this story referred to as the story of Elisha the prophet and the Shunammite woman. I think it's important for us for a moment before we ever read to highlight the fact the Bible never mentions her name. That's important. Just like the nameless armor bearer that was the hero of our story last week, the woman in 2 Kings chapter 4 remains nameless. And I think God does this for a reason. There are places throughout Scripture where the central figure or the hero of the story does not have a name. And I think the reason He lets them remain nameless is to invite us to see ourselves in the story. It's the same reason there's a silhouette hanging from the scaffolding out there. There's 100 years of our church's history that is told. The story is told in the scaffolding. The reason there's a silhouette there is because that is every man. That is asking you to invite yourself, where do you fit in the story? And I think that's some of the same reason why God leaves some of these stories nameless. He wants you to see how you fit into the story. In a church our size, it's easy to come into one of our services and blend in. You can walk in and walk out regularly and remain anonymous. And that's exactly why some people come here, because they're hurt or they're curious or they're tired and they just want to blend in. They either want to heal or they want to be able to seek in private or they just want to rest. And that's completely fine until being anonymous means you're lonely, until being anonymous makes you feel forgotten. That's why this Old Testament story of the miraculous work of God in an unnamed woman's life reminds you that while you may be anonymous to me, and while you may be anonymous to other people, God knows your name, and He is intimately and actively involved in your life. He knows exactly what you're going through, ordering your steps every day, and I believe ordered your steps today in order to get a word of hope on this journey that you're on. The Shunammite woman, as we read her story, passes through what you could call several thresholds or passageways or stages in her life from brokenness to promise. And as we walk through her story, I want you to see yourself in the story. And I want you to think collectively about where our church is in the story. And my hope is this conversation is going to help you identify with some clarity what stage you are in the journey and impart some wisdom on how to navigate this season of your life. Here's how the story begins. Verse 8, 2 Kings 4. One day, Elisha went to the town of Shunem. A wealthy woman lived there, and she urged him to come to her home for a meal. After that, whenever he passed that way, he would stop there for something to eat. She said to her husband, I'm sure this man who stops in from time to time is a holy man of God. Let's build a small room for him on the roof and furnish it with a bed, a table, a chair, and a lamp. Then he will have a place to stay whenever he comes by. Now, I think it's important for us before we read on to see this woman intentionally created and cleared space in her home for the presence of God. Now, we read this, we see, no, she didn't. She cleared space for the prophet, the man. But it was different in her culture. The prophet was considered the spokesperson of God. He was considered the carrier of the presence of God. So when she was making room for the prophet, she was literally clearing space for the presence of God in her home. And I think the story starts by giving us the exact piece of advice we need. Some of us can't hear God right now because we haven't made room for Him. We can't hear His voice. We can't feel His presence because we've cluttered our lives with so much junk. There are so many competing voices and so much outside noise in our life that we can't hear God and we can't feel God. There are moments in our lives when we simply need to stop, clean out the clutter, silence the competing voices, clear some space in our life, make room, and invite God back in to that space. The story continues in verse 11. One day, Elisha returned to Shunem. He went up to this upper room to rest. He said to his servant Gehazi, tell the woman from Shunem I want to speak to her. When she appeared, Elisha said to Gehazi, tell her, we appreciate the kind concern you've shown us. What can we do for you? Can we put in a good word for you to the king or to the commander of the army? No, she replied, my family takes good care of me. Later, Elisha asked Gehazi, what can we do for her? You have this sense that Elisha is moved with deep gratitude for the kindness and benevolence of this woman, and he wants to somehow repay her. Gehazi replied, she doesn't have a son, and her husband is an old man. Call her back again, Elisha told him. When the woman returned, Elisha said to her as she stood in the doorway, next year at this time, you will be holding a son in your arms. No, my Lord, she cried. Oh, man of God, don't deceive me and get my hopes up like that. But sure enough, the woman soon became pregnant, and at that time, the following year, she had a son, just as Elisha had said. Now, I want you to pay attention where the woman was standing when the prophet spoke the word to her. Verse 15, call her back, Elisha told him. When the woman returned, Elisha said to her as she stood in the doorway, that is a threshold, next year at this time, you'll be holding a son in your arms. This is the very place that some of us stand today. We're at our own threshold. We stand in our own doorway. And God has brought us here to remind us of a promise. Some of us are facing the most difficult season of our lives. Others are living in the most successful and comfortable place in our lives. And I've learned, whether it's heartache or comfort, both extremes have a way of silencing the voice of God in our life and blurring us to the promise of God in our life. And I want you to notice how the Shunammite woman responds to the word of the Lord while she stands in the doorway. Verse 16, next year at this time, you'll be holding a son in your arms. Listen, no, my Lord. Oh, man of God, don't deceive me and get my hopes up like that. It's obvious that the words of the prophet had awakened a desire in her that she had shoved way down in her heart. She had asked so long, she had believed so passionately, without any answer, she gave up. She doesn't even want to talk about it anymore. She doesn't want her hopes up, only to be disappointed again. So the Lord brings her to a doorway for the same reasons He brings us to a threshold of promise or a doorway. There are dreams that we've shoved in the back corner of the attic. There are things that we have boxed up and shoved in the bottom corner of a junky closet because they seem impossible. The timing was off. The delay was so long. We moved on. We gave up. So he's bringing you to a threshold, a doorway of promise to tell you he's not finished with you. He wants to revive what's gone dormant and stir your hope for the future. We say things like, I can't get my hopes up anymore about my children coming back to God. I can't get my hopes up anymore about my marriage getting any better. I can't get my hopes up anymore about the financial situation. I can't get my hopes up anymore about that baby. I can't get my hopes up anymore about this ministry opportunity. You're saying like her, look, we've effectively coped with the denial of our miracle. Let us move on, please. On the heels of all that happened in 2017, I felt the Lord pushing me in that season to be a dealer of hope. Every time I stood up here, just give hope, give hope, give hope. Look to the future, give hope. So much so, there are people that are asking, Pastor, do you not see what's going on? How heartbroken we are? Yes, I was as heartbroken as any of us in that moment, but the Lord kept keeping me future focused. Don't let this moment destroy the plans I have for you in the future. I can't tell you how many times I quoted Psalm 30 verse 5, weeping may tarry for the night, but joy comes with the morning. Even though I didn't feel like it, and even though it didn't feel like it at the time, there was a promise of a day when the sun would shine again, because this is the Lord's church and we are His people, and He will not let the enemy win. And 2.5 years later, as we look back, I would say we didn't just survive that season, we have thrived through that season. Yes, we're still broken. Yes, we still grieve. But I can testify that we have seen the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living, and we have seen the faithfulness of God in the face of our pain. We've realized that God's promise to us as we stand in the threshold is not a promise of deception. The promise of what God is doing in our church isn't based on my ability, even more than the promise of a son for the Shunammite woman was based on Elisha's. All of our promises are based on the character and the ability of God, and He won't fail. He brings this woman to a threshold to revive a relinquished desire in her heart. He wanted to give her the desire of her heart, so much so that He brings her to this threshold to reawaken her faith and compel her down the journey in pursuit of a forgotten dream. Now this thing that she had thrown in the corner of the attic or had boxed up and thrown in the bottom of the closet is now a box of possibility as she stands in the doorway of God's promise. Now, for those of you who've struggled with infertility, this story impacts you at a very personal level. And let me encourage you, don't say it's over until God says it's over. He may have brought you to this doorway to give you your own biological child, or He may have brought you to this doorway to show you the most God-centered, gospel-centered act in human history, the miracle of adoption. God's promises don't always look at the end the way we thought they would in the beginning, but as we walk through the doorway in response to His voice, He will always prove Himself faithful. Regardless of the dormant desire in your heart, as a child of God, don't give up on your dream. And don't lay down in your disappointment. And I would say to North Place collectively, don't give up on our dreams and don't lay down in our disappointment. Don't lay down on our promises. Be strong, be open, be willing. It's not over till God says it's over, and it's in the doorway, the threshold of promise, that God says exactly the opposite. He says the season of heartbreak is going to expedite the vision, propel us into the future, and catapult us into His promises. Here's what we learn as we process through disappointment. Doorways lead to hallways. Now, hallways aren't any better than doorways. They're just a necessary part of the journey God is taking us on. Hallways are corridors that carry us to what's next. And when you're in a hallway headed towards your promise, there's always this scary sense of ambiguity. You really don't know where you're going. You don't know how long this is going to last. And if your hallway experiences are anything like my hallway experiences, they are always darker than you're comfortable with, and they always last longer than you think they should. I don't know about you, but to me it seems like God is against the idea of a short hallway. The Shunammite woman was about to go down a long, dark hallway. She was going to receive her miracle, the miracle of a son, but that miracle was going to take her down a hallway that would challenge her faith and shake her to a core, to the point she didn't know she would make it. Tragedy and heartbreak often mark the journey through the hallway. Listen to this. One day when her child was older, he went out to help his father, who was working with the harvesters. Suddenly, he cried out, "My head hurts, my head hurts." His father said to one of the servants, "Carry him home to his mother." Now let me just say something. I'm going to go on and get more into the nuts and bolts of this, but I had more of a kind of a humorous insight here. I realized as I read this, men are exactly the same no matter what culture or generation they're from. Did you see that? My head hurts, my head hurts. His father said, "Carry him home to his mother." Another culture, hundreds of years earlier, go see your mama. So the servant took him home, and his mother held him in her lap, but around noontime, he died. She carried him up and laid him on the bed of the man of God. Notice that, where she put him. And she shut the door, and she left him there. Now, this is the very reason she didn't want her hopes up in the first place. The very reason she didn't want to listen to what the prophet was saying as she stood in the doorway of promise, because she could control living with the pain of denial better than she could control dealing with the pain of loss. Her heart had been crushed so badly in the past that she didn't want to let go and trust God in this particular moment. And yet, in the threshold of promise, she trusted God. She walked through the doorway, and now her heart is shattered again. It's the same reason some of us are missing out on what God wants in the faith journey, because walking in a faith journey means losing control. It means letting go and letting God with no guarantees of the end result or what kind of hallways we're going to have to walk through. You may not understand the season you find yourself in. This moment was incredibly confusing to this moment. She wasn't in a doorway anymore. She has followed God into the hallway of promise, but now she's more confused and heartbroken than ever. But she teaches us something in the uncertainty of her life. She shows us how to navigate the ambiguity of our own hallways. Number one, go back to the place you last had clarity from God. She takes the boy and she lays him on the bed of the prophet and shuts the door. Here's the point. She takes what has died, she takes the confusion, she takes what she cannot understand, she takes the problem right back to the place where the promise was originally made. She takes her distress and puts it on the place where she first had hope. She takes what has happened that she doesn't understand back to the place where she had clarity when she did understand. And when I saw this, I was immediately reminded of Jacob. Jacob betrayed his family, ran from God, ran from his family. As a young man, he was lonely, had an encounter with God at a place called Bethel. God made a promise with Jacob, marked his life, and said, "Jacob, I'm going to be faithful to you." But Jacob, throughout the rest of his life, wasn't faithful to God. After years of running 100 miles in the wrong direction, living up to his name, which means deceiver, his life had been shattered, one tragedy after another, and as a broken man, he falls on his face. And in Genesis 35, God tells Jacob, "Go back to Bethel. Go back to where it all started. Go back to where you heard my voice the first time. Go back to where you felt my presence the first time. Go back to when it was real and intimate and tears stained the side of your face when you were in the presence." And I can't tell you how real I felt as I was preparing for this message today, that there are some of us in this room that are in the very same place. We need to go back to Bethel. We need to build an altar. We need to get back to the altar, get back to prayer, get back to worship. The word has grown stale. Our prayer life is almost non-existent. We can't remember the last time a salty tear stained our cheek because of the nearness of the presence of God. Noise and clutter. You may not be able to go back to the physical place that you were. If you can, go. If you can't, build an altar here and get back to Bethel and let God reawaken the affections of your heart. Go back to the last place you had clarity from God. Number two, here's something else she teaches us. There's no talking in the hallway. Now, I don't know what it was like in your school, but we had that rule. I thought it was a dumb rule. You couldn't talk in the hallway. I understand not talking in class. I don't know why you can't talk in the hallway. But what made it even worse on me is from junior high on, I was in Student Government Association, and they used the SGA or the Student Council to be hall monitors in our grades, on our hallways. And so it was the most difficult thing in the world to be a peer as a hall monitor to provoke quiet in the hallway when I thought the rule was dumb in the first place. You want the hall to be quiet? Put the principal in the hallway. They'll be quiet. They're not going to get quiet because I'm in the hallway. By the way, I think they ought to be able to talk anyway. But I'm in the hallway as a peer enforcing something I really think is a dumb mistake. But now as I'm older and I look back, I realize there were people wiser than me and smarter than me who knew if 1,000 people at the same time all started sharing their stuff in the hallway, nobody's ever going to get to where they're going on time. We have to learn in the hallway to pick up the dead thing, to pick up the broken thing, to pick up the betrayal, whatever it is in your life, and take it back to the God of promise instead of getting caught up in the drama that so often happens in the hallway. This lady is biblical proof that you can face the junk of life without creating drama or getting caught up in the drama in your hallway. When she sought out the prophet to help her in her hallway, she didn't talk to everybody else along the way. As a matter of fact, she kept her mouth shut until she got to the prophet. Verse 24, so she saddled the donkey and said to the servant, hurry, don't slow down unless I tell you. In other words, I don't want to be in this position any longer than I have to be. As she approached the man of God at Mount Carmel, Elisha saw her in the distance. He said to Gehazi, look, the woman from Shunem is coming. Run out to meet her and ask, is everything all right with you, your husband, and your child? Now, when Gehazi asked that, listen to her response. Yes, the woman told Gehazi, everything is fine. No, it's not. But when she came to the man of God at the mountain, she fell to the ground before him, caught hold of his feet, and it was there that she spilled her guts. She held her tongue in front of everybody else, but she filled her guts and her heart to God, the right people at the right places at the right time. There's some maturity in the way this woman conducted herself. When a lot of us do when something goes wrong in our life is we take our frustrations out on people, or we use social media like it's a psychiatrist's couch, and we process out loud and we bleed on people who have no context for our pain or no qualifications to help us. Notice, she didn't FaceGram it, she didn't Instabook it, and she didn't say publicly. All right, I did that on purpose. All right, I'm not that old. She didn't say they betrayed me. They hurt me. Do you see what they did to me? Look at my wounds. Look at my scars. I've been treated so badly. Everybody needs to know it. Look at all my baggage. No talking in the hallway. But there's something else that baggage statement brings up that she teaches us about hallways. Hallways are narrow. So don't bring your bags into the hallway. Don't bring your baggage in the hallway. There isn't room. You have a choice to make. If you try to hold on to all your baggage, you end up camping out and staying in the hallway. And the hallway was a place God intended you to pass through. The hallway was not a destination point. But your baggage and all your junk you bring into the hallway isn't going to let you pass through the narrow corridor of a hallway season. You can delay your destiny when you make what was supposed to be a temporary place a permanent place. Some people will never get to their promise because they move all their junk out in the hallway. But you have another choice. You can take your baggage back to the place of promise, leave it there, shut the door, and get down the hallway as fast as you possibly can. But because we walk these hallways, these corridors of brokenness in our life, and we don't know when the exit door is, we don't know how long the dark hallway is going to last. We get tired when we're walking through the valley of the shadow. The valley's lasting too long. So we pull up a chair and we sit down to rest, and then we ultimately settle and wind up living in the hallway as if that's God's best for our life. But God never desired for you to settle in this season. He wanted you to pass through the valley of the shadow. Verse 24 says, so she saddled the donkey and said to the servant, hurry, don't slow down unless I tell you. In other words, get the fastest donkey and don't stop unless I fall off. Let's get through this thing. Today, some of us need to get back up. We need to pack up the living quarters that we've made out of the hallway and start moving again towards the promise of God in our lives. We need to stop letting the enemy assign an address to us that God has never given us. The end of the story we read here is exactly what we would expect in a sitcom society where the whole world blows up and there's a nice, neat resolution in every sitcom in 28 minutes and 30 seconds. That's the world we are living in. That's what we would expect to happen here. So when we get to the end of this story, we assume the boy is miraculously healed. It happens in an incredible way, but this isn't the end of the story. there are not only doorways and hallways, there's also another thing called a gateway. Have you ever been through a season in your life, you went through something, you know God says in His Word He's going to take all things and work them together for good and use them for good things in the lives of people that love Him and are called according to His purpose, that there's actually purpose in my pain. And yet, have you ever been through seasons in your life when you look back on what you just went through and you're going, what was that all about? I mean, I made it. I'm thankful we survived it. We came out on the other end. But what in the world, what kind of purpose could God bring out of that season in my life? And this is what I've learned. Even though God doesn't cause my pain, I learned that He often allows what He hates to accomplish what He loves. I've never seen that any more clearly than I have in the story of Susie Stearman and her son Alex. Susie is an incredible woman, Italian lady. Her and her husband Frank. Frank was in the military. They met in Italy, moved here to the U.S. Frank's a pastor's kid. They started attending North Place. Mature believers, served in ministry in Italy, and they just became a vital part of our church. And off and on during their tenure here, Susie battled breast cancer, and it would go away and then come back, and every time it would come back with a vengeance. And throughout all those battles with cancer, Susie would say to me, Pastor, I just want my son Alex to come to Jesus. Would you meet with him? I'm like, Susie, I will. She told Alex about me and me about Alex. It just never materialized. Alex was not really interested at that time in meeting me, and it just never really worked out. But that was, I can go back through emails right now, dozens. We got to work it out for you to meet Alex. I'm praying for Alex. That was her heart's cry. When Susie passed, I got a call from Frank, her husband, and wanted to make sure, I didn't want him to be alone at the home. And Haley and I ran over there to see him and knocked on the door. And the first time I ever met Alex is when he opened the door to the house that day. Grown man, a business owner, was there with Frank, and he opens the door that day, and I said, I'm Pastor Brian. Is Frank home? He said, I'm Alex, and the first statement out of his mouth is, I don't do religion. Frank is in the back. Okay? I said, I'm not here to push any religion on you, man. I'm just here to try to do what I can to help serve your dad. We go through and that evening, plan the service. We get into this service that was held right here in this sanctuary. The Lord had given me a message that day. I really believe He birthed a message in my heart that day to comfort people in Susie's loss. She was an incredible woman. Comfort Frank and Alex and the family. At the end of the time when everybody had left and I'm remaining back with the family, it's the last viewing before we process out. I'm standing here, the casket's right here, and I see Alex coming straight for me, and I'm like, oh no. But I was shocked. He said to me, Pastor, I think I get it. You get what? He said, it all makes sense today. I said, this is the day when it's not supposed to make sense. He said, no, but it does. It all makes sense today. What my mom told me all my life and thinking through her battle with cancer and what you just said in the sermon, it's like a light bulb went off and it all makes sense today. And I said, Alex, what are you saying? He said, I think I'm ready to give my life to God. And I stood right there by his mom's casket, which was the wish of her life, that at her funeral service, her son wept her way to Jesus. And I can probably count on one hand, maybe just a few fingers, the number of times he's missed church since that funeral. The transformation in his life has been incredible. I reached out to him and said, do you mind if I tell your story? He said, no, anytime you can honor the Lord's grace in my life and you can honor my mom, you tell that story anytime you possibly can. None of us are immune from sorrow. And sometimes God will allow what He hates to accomplish what He loves. But if we can have eyes to see it, we can see that God will take seed out of every sorrow and He will plant them in somebody else's tomorrow. He's going to extract from today's pain and seed it into a promise into the future. He's going to let no season of your life be wasted or squandered. You have heard me call Him Jehovah Frugal more than once because He does not waste our pain. The Shunammite woman was about to discover this, but it doesn't happen in 2 Kings 4. It happens in 2 Kings chapter 8. Considerable time has passed. It was not immediate. For years, I never saw the purpose in the sexual abuse I endured as a child. How in the world, when the Bible says you take all things and work them together for good, how can you take that And now here I am, though, looking back on years of engaging other children who've lived through the same hell I lived through and helping bring healing to their lives. I can see how God allowed the seeds of my sorrow to be a seed of promise in somebody else's tomorrow. It wasn't immediate, but now I know. I know the seed of your sorrow is in somebody else's future. You don't always know it at the time when you're walking down the hallway, traveling through the dark season. Some of you have been through bankruptcy. Some of you have been through a broken marriage. Some of you have been through bereavement and loss. And God is saying, I didn't cause it, but I'm going to use it. I'm going to use it to build you, and I'm going to turn what the enemy meant for evil, and I'm going to use it for good. This moment is going to be a gateway into your future, a seed of sorrow planted in the promise of tomorrow. Because of famine, the Shunammite woman was forced to leave her home. She was gone 7 years. She left her family, her friends, everything familiar, and when she vacated her home, somebody else took over her land. Somebody else moved into her house. After 7 years was over, she wanted to come back home. But she knew the only way she'd have any chance of getting her stuff back was to go straight to the king. And she does. She makes a request. She walks up to the gateway of the king's palace. And coincidentally, at the very moment she walks up to the gateway at the king's palace, the king just happens to be having a cup of tea with Gehazi. In that exact moment, Gehazi says to Gehazi, the king says, tell me some of the most incredible miracles that Elisha did. And Gehazi said, there are a lot of them, but let me tell you about this one. That one time when he raised the Shunammite woman's son from the dead, and while he is in the middle of telling the story, out of the corner of his eye, he notices the Shunammite woman standing at the king's gateway. Verse 5 of 2 Kings chapter 8 says this, look, my lord the king, here is the woman now, and this is her son, the very one Elisha brought back to life. Is this true? The king asked her. And she told him the story. So he directed one of his officials to see that everything she had lost was restored to her, including the value of any crops that had been harvested during her absence. Let me encourage you. Don't give up in your hallway before you get to your gateway. But your gateway is the place where God rewards you for your faithfulness during the heartbreak, for your faithfulness during the confusion, for your faithfulness in the pain. The gateway is the reward for faithfulness of enduring the long, dark hallway. Just keep moving, because there's a gateway at the end of your hallway that only God can orchestrate. There's going to be an open door you couldn't make happen, an act of favor that would have never been possible, an opportunity that God brings out of your pain. The seeds of yesterday's pain and today's pain are going to bear fruit in your future. Just keep walking, because God doesn't waste any season of your life. As a church, we're about to step into our gateway. We've been navigating a long hallway, trusting Him all along the way. But I sense the King is about to do something in us and through us that only He can orchestrate. Bigger than coincidence, bigger than luck, bigger than chance. It's the sovereignty of God. On a personal level, I don't know where this finds you today. Maybe you're in a doorway and there's a dormant dream that needs to be taken out of a box. Maybe you find yourself in the middle of a long, dark hallway season, and you've turned a temporary place into a permanent place. You moved all the junk out in the hallway, and it's time you start packing up your stuff and saying, you know what, I gave up on that promise way too early. I gave up on myself way too early. It's time to put all this junk back in this box and go marching down this hallway towards the promise. Some of you lived through it. You're coming to the end of your hallway, looking back, going, what was that all about? How's God going to use that? What purpose is going to come out of that? If that's where you are, I would stop right where you are and start looking around for a gateway. There's something God is orchestrating in your life that only He can orchestrate. He's not going to waste that season of your life. I think it's important for us to start where she did. This whole story started because she got all the clutter out. She shut all the noise out. She stopped all the competing voices, and she made room for the presence of God in her life. I know that what I've said today is So important to so many individual lives for so many different reasons. But if the Lord would have said, Brian, you can only say one thing today. You got 90 seconds to say one thing today. I would have walked up to this pulpit and I would have said, get back to Bethel. Some of us in this room, we know what it's like. We've been intimate with God. We've been in His presence. We've wept in His presence. The Word has been alive. We couldn't get down the road without the worship music touching our heart. We've had to pull the car off on the side of the road because we've been so overcome with the presence of God. I mean, we've had those moments in our life, and for some of us, it's been years. We're still good people. We're still going through the motions. We do our duty. We get up every weekend and we go to church. It ain't what it used to be. And maybe we've made this hallway of spiritual desolateness. We camped out here. And God's saying the same thing to you. He said to her, take it back to the place where you first had clarity. Leave it in there. Leave it in the feet of Jesus. Leave it in the presence of God. He's saying the same thing to you. He said to Jacob, go back to Bethel. Go back to where it all started. Go back to where you heard the voice. And if you can't get back to wherever that Bethel moment was for you, it may be 3 states away and 40 years ago, then make a Bethel out of this room today. Kneel where you are. Get on your face in this altar and say, God, reawaken the affections of my heart. Don't let me go through these motions like this for the rest of my life. It doesn't have to be this way. Revive your work in my heart. Reawaken the dream, the call. Help me pack this stuff up and move towards the promise. I want us to sing it today like we sang it a moment ago. And I want you to let it be the words of a song that is a declaration today. I believe it, that God, it may be silent right now, but I believe He's not still. He is active in my life. Would you stand with us today right here before we leave this place? Sing this song with us. Even when I can't see it.
You working, you never stop working, you never stop.
Come on, make that declaration of faith.
Even when I don't see it, you're working. Even when I don't feel it, you're working. You never stop working. You never stop working. Even when I don't see it, you're working.
He's a way maker. Come on, tell Him.
Way maker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness. My God, that is who you are.
Yes, you are. Yes, you are.
Way maker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness.
I want the prayer team to make themselves available to serve you today. And listen, some of us are at a threshold, a doorway of promise to reawaken a dormant dream. We want to pray with you. Some of you are walking down a long, dark hallway, and you've been there a lot longer than you feel comfortable. And we want to pray with you in this season of your life. Some of you just passed through a season you don't understand, trying to figure out what in the world was that all about. He's about to show you a gateway, how the seed of that season of sorrow is going to be planted into the promise of tomorrow. He's going to be looking for a gateway. We want to pray with you. But there's some of you that just need to go back to Bethel. You need to come and kneel at this altar today, or maybe make an altar right where you are before you leave this place and say, God, awaken my heart again. Father, will you meet us in this place today? I pray that this would be a Bethel moment. A prodigal would come home today. A cold-hearted man who's just going through the motions. A broken and bitter woman who's just going through the routine. She's here out of duty today, but she really doesn't feel it. God, would you restore her heart today? Renew her affection for God today. Bring us back to the place of promise where we first had clarity, where we felt the presence of God. Would you make it new again, fresh again? Restore the joy of our salvation today. Take us back to Bethel today. I pray that you will bless them and keep them, that you will make your face shine down upon them, that you would be gracious to them, Lord, that you would turn your countenance their direction and you would give their hearts peace today and bring us back to Bethel when we first heard your voice. We ask this in Jesus' name. Amen and amen. These altars are open. This whole sanctuary can be a Bethel for you. Just whatever you need to do, just make this moment matter. God bless you.